Poor enforcement and lack of political goodwill is what I have researched. You can correct me if I'm wrong later behind the tent. And in Kenya, we even face more barriers when we step forward to contest in elections. We face significant financial barriers, as political campaigns, of course, require substantial resources that many of us can't actually access. Beyond contesting for office, many of us struggle to exercise our fundamental right to vote at all, with inaccessible polling stations, rough terrains, lack of ramps, and the absence of voting materials in accessible formats, such as braille or large print. This excludes us from the democratic process of voting. No sign language interpreters and assistive devices also discourages voter participation by PWDs, making elections very exclusionary rather than inclusive. For those of us who miraculously manage to secure seats in politics, the next hurdles are active participation in the actual governance work itself. Government buildings lack necessary infrastructure such as ramps, lifts, and assistive technologies to help us as parliamentarians, making it difficult for leaders with disabilities to effectively perform our duties, both in Parliament and in our constituencies. Ironically, we fight to make it into leadership positions only to get there and face the same exclusionary practices we sought to dismantle in the first place. This challenge is even greater for us as women with disabilities, who endure compounded discrimination, facing cyberbullying, gender-based violence, and all types of visceral and violent abuse because of our disabilities. Our challenge extends beyond politics, however. Education remains a critical area where we continue to be left behind in Kenya, just as in Nigeria. Schools are inaccessible. Inadequate learning materials, a shortage of special needs teachers, and insufficient inclusive infrastructure. Many learners with disabilities drop out due to these barriers, limiting our chances of acquiring skills necessary for economic independence later in life. So you see, the cycle is very, very limiting for us. In Nigeria and Kenya alike, despite policies aimed at inclusive education, implementation remains weak, with most schools lacking the facilities to accommodate students with disabilities. Special needs programs are spectacularly misunderstood and underfunded, while mainstream schools are ill-equipped to support us with disabilities. We also face significant discrimination in the job market, of course. In Kenya, our constitution, I said, mandates that at least 5% of jobs in public and private sector ought to be reserved for PWDs. But enforcement is very poor. Similarly, I see in Nigeria, in your Persons with Disabilities Act of 2018, mandates workplace inclusion, yet implementation, when I talk to PWDs, seems to still be weak. Employers in both countries routinely ignore these legal provisions, unfortunately, leaving many of us jobless or disproportionately underpaid. Without proper enforcement mechanisms and accountability, economic independence stays out of reach for us. Access to healthcare is another major challenge. Many health facilities are not disability-friendly at all, with physical barriers such as lack of ramps and inaccessible washrooms make it difficult for us to receive quality medical care. Additionally, healthcare providers are often not trained to cater to our unique medical needs. While Kenya has introduced some disability-inclusive health policies, which is great, implementation, again, is very inconsistent. Nigeria seems to face similar struggles where we are often unable to access basic medical care due to financial constraints in the absence of disability-conscious medical services. Social protection is one of the most overlooked areas for us in both Kenya and Nigeria. Many of us and our caregivers live in poverty due to limited employment opportunities and the high cost of living with a disability. In Kenya, whilst cash transfer programs do exist, they are irregular, unfortunately, and underfunded in the national budget and fail to reach all intended beneficiaries. And similarly, in Nigeria, I see that while the law recognizes for social support, weakened enforcement and inadequate funding mean that most of us do not receive the financial assistance that we need to survive. Without well-structured and adequately funded social protection programs, we remain highly vulnerable to economic hardships, making it nearly impossible to break the cycle of poverty within the PWD community. So, to address these systemic underrepresentation in leadership, political parties must adopt affirmative action policies here in Nigeria that ensure our inclusion in party structures and election lists. That's what I would encourage. Further, you must introduce financial support mechanisms such as dedicated campaign funds for PWDs, reduced or waived nomination fees, and access to party funding for those of us seeking elective offices in Nigeria. Away from political participation and now to governance. The ministry responsible for social welfare and inclusion in Nigeria, which I believe is the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, must also establish strict monitoring mechanisms. This includes things like mandatory annual audits to assess disability mainstreaming compliance in the country, public reporting to enhance transparency in the country, and clear penalties for non-compliance to hold institutions accountable. Additionally, a centralized database that tracks disability inclusion in workplaces would also help identify gaps and guide necessary interventions by policymakers in the room. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's turn to laws and regulations that pertain to transport and the built environment, which somebody also mentioned earlier. With the prevalent notion that accessibility is just providing ramps and lifts, that is very, very small-minded and dangerous. Without educating each other on what universal design features are and how they should make it into policy, we are running the risk of forever believing that accommodative to persons with disabilities means just building a simple ramp or just installing the cheapest lift in the market because, hey, that's all we need, right? To be compliant, right? Wrong. It's wrong. As an inclusive transport mobility practitioner myself, I would take you into a quick universal design class if there was time, but there isn't. The built environment should be meticulously designed and constructed and maintained to ensure safety. In my world of inclusive transport and mobility, orientation specifically means the ability to navigate, identify potential hazards, and determine when one has reached a destination. If PWDs cannot do these three things, then your transport systems in the built environment is non-inclusive. Right, so since arriving in Abuja just a few days ago, I couldn't help but mentally audit the buildings and streets that I've used so far. I've experienced a concerning lack of accessibility, unfortunately. And if Abuja, the capital city of Nigeria, which ought to lead by example, fails to uphold accessibility requirements, then how can we expect other parts of the country to comply? That's my question. And that's the question I also put to all leaders in Kenya as well, so don't feel like I'm being biased. I'm certain that PWDs in Nigeria want and need to access parliament, courthouses, police stations, social centers, educational institutions. We want to access sporting venues, houses of worship, malls and supermarkets, cinemas and museums, cafes and restaurants, and even bars and nightclubs. It may be hard to believe, Your Excellency, But as people with disabilities, we don't only visit hospitals and therapy facilities. We want to experience everything. And freedom of movement should not be a luxury. It is an inalienable human right. Recognizing these systemic barriers, I have been at the forefront of advocating for stronger enforcement of disability inclusion through my Persons with Disabilities Bill of 2023 in Kenya, now on its way to becoming law very soon. This bill represents a significant milestone for us in Kenya, aiming to modernize outdated disability laws and ensure that our rights and needs are effectively protected from top to bottom. There are many salient features, and I would invite, if you have time, to go through the PWD Act, Bill of 2023 that I am sponsoring. These legislative efforts are crucial, but laws alone are not enough. Real change requires action, whether through affirmative action policies or by actively encouraging us to apply for positions. Organizations and governments must step up. Inclusion matters, and it is long, long overdue. So, after all that, what the heck am I trying to say anyway, right? What I'm trying to say specifically to the legislators in the room, and please bookmark this in your mind, is prioritize and pass disability responsive laws. Please, on behalf of persons with disabilities, 15 million plus in your country. Some of you will remember yesterday when I told you about research that shows countries lose up to 10% of their annual GDP due to a lack of accessibility in different sectors. Can you imagine that? 10% of our annual GDP off the table. I can give you examples of so many jurisdictions, like in the UK, where it's said that they lose over £42 million per month by failing to provide options that are fully accessible for persons with disabilities. This underlines the long-term benefits that upfront investment to accessible transport and infrastructure and services can return to you if you prioritize them. Moving to women. Don't worry, ladies, we're here now. For the majority, yes. For the majority of recorded history, you will know that women have experienced restricted rights and legal status, hindering our participation in public life and many more. Just a few years ago, we were confined to subordinate roles in comparison to men. Speaking out assertively or deviating from traditional gender norms risked severe consequences for us. I could not stand in a room like this and speak. Otherwise, I would have been considered a heretic. I couldn't dress like a man in trousers. Otherwise, I would have been considered a rebel and hanged on the stake as a woman. It wasn't until the late 17th century that women gained the right to suffrage. The persistent struggle of women in Kenya, specifically over the last 3 decades, has brought about significant changes in our country. It is because of this ongoing fight that I can stand here today and speak freely without fearing repercussions. Yes. And as we gather here today, I will try to move to land. Let me try and land. I want to, pardon me. So let me touch on you as I land. You all know exactly what it was like being young, disruptive, and agitating for change. And you also remember what it was like being told no, being held back, with your frustrations forcibly repressed. But even your doctor and even your pastor will tell you that the repression of healthy anger disrupts the entire immune system. This is exactly what we see manifesting in Africa as we speak. I see bottled up frustrations disrupting long-standing systems because youth acutely understand that in order to build something that lasts, you must break down before you can build up. And isn't that precisely what Mother Nature shows us time and time again? Doesn't the seed that you throw into the ground have to disintegrate first before the flower blooms? Doesn't a caterpillar have to struggle its way out of a cocoon before becoming a butterfly? And doesn't thunder and rain come before the rainbow? The only problem is, in my opinion, that many of us want the rainbow, but do not want to weather the rain. Africa's youth have a real shot at shaping the future, but all generations that are stuck in the past have to get out of the way, and please tell them to take the status quo with them. Because familiarity is not always brave, and similar is not always safe. I believe in creating opportunities where talent is unstifled by bureaucracy, innovation isn't dismissed as rebellion, and young voices don't have to scream just to be heard. We all know what happened last year. And I stood with the over 1 million of the most courageous protesters on the 24th of June in Kenya, and they know that I would do it over and over again, amplifying their voices, because the world needs a constant reminder that we are not just the leaders of tomorrow, but the force that is not interested to build for a place that we once began. We are interested in building for where we want to go. So, I'm trying to rush through into my conclusion. Throw out what's not necessary. So, right. My approach to legislation is anchored in all of these things I've talked about, to listening, to articulating, and bringing along every single person that I represent, because the experts don't sit in parliament. Yeah? The real experts are our constituents on the ground. They know their problems, and therefore they know their solutions. It is incumbent on us to listen. Inclusion must be everyone's business, regardless of gender, disability, religion, geography, socio-economic standing, or political association. Because no one can intimately understand this exclusion better than an African. And people continue to reap the benefits from us, from keeping us divided. Because what is divided cannot stand. For too long, we have been conditioned to accept colonial systems that exclude and undermine and control us. And guess what? Every system is designed to achieve its results, right? Ask yourself, is this system broken? Or is it doing exactly what it was designed to do by those who gave it to us? These are the ingredients that keep us acquiescent while receiving a drip feeding of information and ideas, which are designed to keep us enslaved, but this time with no visible ball and chains. Yesterday, in a conversation with His Excellency, former President Goodluck Johnson asked me if I believe democracy is working, and I responded by saying, perhaps not in the form in which it was handed to us. As a young person, of course, have my own philosophies, but let's look, for example, at Socrates' prediction of the fall of democracy. He says, democracy must fall because it will try to tailor to everyone. The poor will want the wealth of the rich, and democracy will give it to them. Young people will want to be respected as elderly, and democracy will give it to them. Women will want to be like men, and democracy will give it to them. He says foreigners will want the rights of the natives, and democracy will give it to them. Thieves and fraudsters will want important government functions, and democracy will give it to them. And at that time, he says, when thieves and fraudsters finally democratically take authority because criminals and evildoers also want power, there will be worse dictatorship than in the time of any monarchy or oligarchy. End of quote. If indeed this is a prognostication of what is to come, Your Excellency, then I would say that we shouldn't only watch out for criminals and evildoers, because fools are also an incredible threat to democracy. Numerous philosophers caution that more harm is done in this world by stupid people than by evil ones, because stupid people are blinded by certainty in their own answers. And it is when you're blinded by your own certainty, that you are the most dangerous, philosophers say. So take from that what you may. We're not here to beg for space as young people, as women, as PWDs. We're here to build it. The world tells us that we are incapable, yet it relies on us, and we will no longer be trapped in outdated structures that forces us into dependency. When it comes to challenges, as I close, I leave this with you. Consider that maybe you have been given this mountain to show others that it can be moved. When it comes to creativity, don't just think outside of the box. Think without one. And when it comes to perspective, remember, if all you see is what you see, then you do not see all there is to be seen. Thank you very, very much.